I think it's time to start. Your Excellency, Dr. Naledi Pandor, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. Your Excellency, Mr. Audun Halvorsen, the State Secretary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Norway. Your Excellency, Madam Bineta Diop, the African Union Envoy on Women, Peace and Security. Gertrude Shope, dear friends and colleagues, I'd like to welcome you to the Gertrude Shope Annual Dialogue Forum. It is a great honor for me to moderate this event named after Gertrude Shope. As a young woman in the struggle, we were lucky to be received and raised by stalwarts like Gertrude Shope when we arrived in exile, a formidable leader in her own right, whose contribution to the struggle against apartheid is monumental. As a leader of the ANC Women's Section in exile, she led the women's movement in mobilizing resources and solidarity globally. The fundraising capacity and resource mobilization capacity of the women's section of the ANC was extraordinary under her leadership. I had the privilege of traveling with Gertrude Shope to many places, and in the Soviet Union during Gorbachev's time, and to see her in action with her courage, humility, and diplomacy marshal the case for support for our struggle inspired me to pursue diplomacy. She was a diplomat par excellence who traveled the world meeting political leaders and civil society, trade unions, the youth, and churches, mobilizing, raising awareness of the struggle in South Africa, and in particular, the plight of detainees, most of whom were children. We forget that the apartheid regime ended up being at war with its children. However, in spite of this and its military might, and including nuclear weapons, we triumphed under the leadership of women such as Gertrude Shope, Mita Siperepere, and Sophie De Bruyn, Ruth Mompati. Democratic South Africa has been at the forefront of the struggle for women's empowerment. And we do this because our country would not be where it is today had it not been for the involvement of women in the struggle. This year, the theme chosen for this discussion and meeting is Global Health and Advancing Women's Financial Inclusion on the Continent. We are particularly aware of the role that women play in the making of peace as a result of the fact that they actually bear the brunt of conflict and war. Naturally, in the way in which things work out, faced with the pandemic, women are again at the forefront of responding globally to the pandemic, and they are the most affected by the pandemic. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our Norwegian partners who have assisted in making these sessions yearly for the Gertrude Shope Annual Dialogue successful. And I look forward to a very rich discussion. And without any waste of time, I would like to invite Madam Diop, the envoy of the African Union on Women, Peace and Security, to make her remarks. Over to you, Madam Diop. The last time I saw you, you were in Geneva. Again, as part of your tireless commitment to ensuring a better life for women, inclusion for women in the continent, in decision making, and in particular, the making of peace, the resolution of peace, and I dare say, the continental response to the pandemic. It is a pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador Makato Disekov. Thank you for giving me the floor. And I'm very much in South Africa today. Thank you for that invitation. And let me recognize Excellency Dr. Naledi Pandor, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation in the Republic of South Africa. And Madam, thank you for having all of us and this Gertrude Shope annual, and for yourself being available and sitting where you are and making sure that it happened for the women and the men of this continent. So let me also recognize Ambassador Udun Alrosen, the State Secretary, Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and all the diplomatic corps, but also civil society organization, and the women mediators in particular of South Africa, but all who are in Africa listening to us today. So let me start by thanking Madam Minister, Dr. Pandor, and through you, the government of South Africa, for again inviting me to this year Gertrude Shope Annual Dialogue Forum. It's always an immense pleasure for me to participate in the forum and join hands with you in our common endeavor to advance the right of women to peace and their agency in peace processes. It's of particular significance to not only walk on the shoulders of such giants like Gertrude Shope, but also carry on the torch, conceptualized to the realities and challenges of our day. Adversity may present itself in diverse form, but our commitment remains unwavering. Therefore, I'm very pleased that the discussion we are having here today focus on an invisible enemy, the COVID-19 pandemic, that has caused so much havoc to our communities, and in particular on women and girls. With a view to situation that the WPS agenda is at the core of post-recovery phase, and I think that this is how we can get together to find solution in the recovery phase. So, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, as I came to know in a very ruthless manner, the consequences of COVID-19 have extended far beyond the health crisis. We have unfortunately seen an increase in all types of challenges, including a sharp rise in gender-based violence, sex trafficking, femicide, and trafficking of women, just to name a few. There's also been reduced access to health services, including an impeding access to sexual and reproductive health services, and debilitating loss of economic income, compounding poverty that has already a dominantly female face in Africa. We have also seen challenges in traditional peace processes, including halted and delayed peace processes in various countries. I just name one, like South Sudan, just to have that example, as well as intensify violence in many countries ahead of election, in addition to slowing down the implementation of peace agreement and the delivery of National Action Plan on WPS. The pandemic has also impacted the work of women peace builders by shrinking even further the civil society space. These women peace builders have experienced a decline in funding, and their mobility have been restricted because of measures to curb the spread of COVID-19, which has made their work more challenging. The pandemic has also exacerbated patriarchal norms and values that hamper women, and the extension of exclusionary politics that has systematically hindered women from participating in leadership and decision-making positions. From a response perspective, The pandemic affected the lives and livelihood of women as they constitute majority of informal workers on the continent. As we know, informal work does not easily make itself open to remote working. Additionally, women have also had to deal with increasing unpaid care work as restrictions have led to many family members staying home and needing care. Many frontline responders, both in health and social services, are women. Women have therefore been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. So, Madam Minister, despite these challenges, local women and youth have been at the front line of addressing the pandemic and leading their communities in recovery efforts. They have delivered hygiene packages, deliver food, and increase awareness of the population on the danger of COVID-19, as well as prevention, and the importance of peace and security during the pandemic. Women-led organization dealing with peace, security, and development. And I think we need to applaud the effort of the Women Minister of Foreign Affairs. Madam Minister, you were there to lead the movement. South Africa was chairing the African Union last year, and this year you are part of the tripartite body that is leading the continent and to recover from this COVID-19. And supported by your lead African women leaders that are playing a key role in strategies, and you put in place strategy and guidelines for gender responsive action to combat COVID-19 and in post-COVID recovery. I remember that during the summit, all the solutions that have been put in place by head of state included this strategy and guidelines for gender responsive action that should be implemented at national level as well. So we witnessed a recent example of the work carried out by women's organization when we conducted a virtual solidarity mission to Mozambique. In the face of the deprivation caused by displacement and violence, women of Mozambique had to be housed by communities, increasing enormously the risk of COVID-19 propagation. I wish to take this opportunity to thank South Africa through the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation that provided an immediate support to initiative of women of Mozambique with a donation of 1 million rand. So we thank you, Madam Minister, that you did for Mozambique, but you did it for African women. You did it for the women of the world. A first step to addressing WPS in the recovery plan is ensuring that our system and structure reflect the reality. As an example, in line with the recovery plan on the continent, the African Union Commission developed a guideline on gender responsive response to COVID-19 pandemic, bearing in mind that responses that do not capture gender analysis may in turn worsen inequality. It is thus imperative that we do not continue business as usual, but ensure that we actively explore the COVID-related risks and opportunities. The WPS Agenda recommends human security through a gender lenses, and this applies equally to conflict and COVID-19 responses. To fully recover from the pandemic, we need to integrate gender perspective, effectively protect women from violence, and guarantee equal access and opportunities that shape and influence every aspect of the response and recovery plan on the continent. Now, more than ever, it's important to increase our advocacy for the inclusion of women in leadership of post-conflict recovery plan. In our recovery plan, women should be actively involved in leadership position and decision making. There is an urgent need for government to increase that participation and beyond the recovery plan of the pandemic. So these glaring gender disparities in COVID-19 decision-making and responses are shown in resulting response plan that do not consider the impact of the pandemic on women and girls. We need to address that. We have all seen that countries with higher level of women in decision-making have responded better to the gender impact on the pandemic on women and girls. Having more women in decision-making position will be critical in addressing exclusion, violence against women, and discrimination, which will be in turn empower women contribution and building society back better. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that our recovery plan should therefore be more responsive, more inclusive, and more contextual than prior to the pandemic. Let me again thank Excellency Dr. Naledi Pandor for also offering to lead the second forum on WPS in Africa. This, the first forum that we had last year, brought together all actors in society, those who are contributing to silencing the gun in Africa. It was hosted in December. We hope, Your Excellency, that you will lead the second forum that we are preparing for the continent, for Africa on the WPS, based on what we are discussing today, and those outcomes of today should guide our discussion for this year. I will once again like to thank Madam Pandor for the invitation of today, but also thank my sisters, all my sisters in this call, and the team that has worked tirelessly to put this forum together this year. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Diop, for your remarks. We note the recommendations that you make on the basis of your analysis of how the pandemic has impacted on women, disrupting processes, peacemaking processes. I hope that the team will ensure that your recommendations are recorded. I would not like to welcome His Excellency Mr. Halvorstetten, the State Secretary of Norway, a country that has come a long way with democratic South Africa. I would hazard to say that without your support during our struggle, it would have been very difficult for us to attain a democracy in the time that we have. You know Africa very well. You've been a friend of Africa, and it's always a comfort and a joy to work with Norway, the Norwegian government, and the people of Norway. Over to you, Your Excellency State Secretary.
Thank you for those warm words of welcome, Madam Ambassador, Minister, Madam Special Envoy, Excellencies, and their participants. It is a pleasure for me to join you on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway, Mrs. Ine Eriksen Søreide. I would like to thank Minister Pandor and South Africa for hosting this important annual forum. Past and present peace and reconciliation efforts have earned South Africa respect and acknowledgement around the globe. And South Africa is the only country in the world that has 4 Nobel Peace Prize laureates. Countries listen to South Africa, and countries want to learn from South Africa. South Africa and Norway are both steadfast champions of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. We share the belief that the inclusion of women is essential for conflict prevention and peace building. And in times of global crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, this is more important than ever. Our countries enjoy long-standing bilateral cooperation on peace and security. And the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has had the pleasure of taking part in the Gertrude Shope Forum for years. We are pleased that the forum is taking place in spite of the current circumstances. The MOU between Norway and South Africa on peace and reconciliation was an important part of the backdrop to our recent successful bilateral consultations. It goes without saying that the working together to ensure women's full, equal and meaningful participation in peace processes is always high on our joint agenda. Our cooperation on training women and young leaders to play important roles in conflict resolution processes and in building sustainable peace is a tangible step in broadening our partnership. It provides the opportunity for meaningful exchanges between our women mediators and helps to expand the pool of women who can take on roles in negotiations and mediations. The regional networks of women mediators have now become a powerful force. While experienced and highly skilled women mediators have played a key role for decades, not least on the African continent, the regional women mediator networks provide a dynamic and more visible platform for their work. South Africa inspired the Nordic Women Mediators Network, which was created in 2015, and other networks have since been established. Together, these provide a reservoir of highly qualified experts that we and others can draw on in peace processes. Norway will continue to support these networks and the Global Alliance. Our partnership with FemWise will continue to be crucial. And both our countries have been instrumental in fostering the global solidarity networks that is now in place. The topic of this session is advancing and celebrating women's leadership in Africa's post-COVID recovery phase. And as we meet today, the pandemic continues to batter Africa with unrelenting force. It is exposing and exacerbating existing vulnerabilities. The virus is compounding the dual impact of conflict and climate change. And when crisis hits, it has a disproportionate impact on those who are already suffering from hardship. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, women living in conflict-affected and post-conflict countries have experienced this firsthand. The pandemic has led to setbacks when it comes to violence against women, sexual and gender-based violence, food insecurity, unemployment, access to sexual and reproductive health services, and access to education. Measures to combat COVID-19 also have wide-ranging implications for women's participation in decision-making processes, including peace processes and national and international political processes. In many instances, the pandemic response has been used as a pretext to limit civil liberties and human rights, and restrict democratic space. Quarantine, lockdowns, closed borders, and restrictions on movement can limit women's ability to participate meaningfully, physically or virtually, in decision-making processes that affect their lives. At the same time, women are on the front lines of the pandemic, as caregivers organizing community response and working to hold communities together. This year's Gertrude Shope Forum targets a crucial topic, because women peace builders are fighting for their communities through political parties and organizations for a seat at the table where decisions concerning their futures are made. They know that decisions are being taken that do not reflect their needs, their perspectives, and their future. And the pandemic has brought into sharp relief the importance of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in crisis prevention, crisis management, and crisis response. It has underscored the imperative of ensuring women's full, equal, and meaningful participation. If women are not included, and if the response to the pandemic and plans for recovery are developed without their contribution, it will be detrimental to our societies. Norway firmly supports women peace builders. First and foremost, because they have an unequivocal right to participate in decisions concerning their future. But also because we know that the inclusion of women peace builders is critical for achieving just, lasting, and sustainable outcomes for the benefit of all. We need to stand together, we need to support each other, and identify funding mechanisms that enhance inclusion. Norway gives priority to the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in its work as an elected member of the UN Security Council. We will continue to insist on the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in all aspects of the UN's peace and security efforts, and to address the disconcerting mismatch between the commitments made in formal documents and resolutions and the realities on the ground. We are already working hard to ensure that these priorities are adequately reflected in the mandates issued by the Council and for accountability in carrying out these mandates. We will draw on our experience from our engagement in peace and reconciliation efforts. We are working with others to ensure that the voices of women civil society leaders are heard in the Security Council. In June, Women members of the Comité de Suivi for the Algiers Peace Agreement spoke at an open expert meeting on Mali. They offered important perspectives from the conflict, providing valuable insight into the situation on the ground from the point of view of women. And we count it as a success that the operative language on women's full, equal and meaningful participation is now consistently used in the MINUSMA mandate that was renewed. Norway also attaches great importance to the Security Council's work on COVID-19. Like South Africa, Norway believes that a coordinated multilateral response is crucial. And we appreciate the excellent collaboration with South Africa in our joint leadership of the ACTA Facilitation Council. Equitable global access to COVID-19 vaccines has not yet been achieved. There is an urgent need to increase access to vaccines in low and middle-income countries and to close the financing gap. In many places, it is crucial to ensure full and unimpeded humanitarian access and protection for humanitarian and medical personnel. The pandemic has clearly highlighted the link between humanitarian efforts and peace and reconciliation. Humanitarian dialogue and ceasefires can provide an opening for political dialogue. And like many other countries, Norway echoed Secretary General Guterres' appeal for the global ceasefire. We used our contacts, our leverage to try and convince parties to conflict to adhere to the appeal, both in terms of ceasefires and other humanitarian issues. And unfortunately, the call for a global ceasefire did not have the effect we had hoped for. A number of processes have ground to a halt due to the inability of parties to meet. And this has generated uncertainty about the way forward and undermined the potential for progress and the prospects for ending conflict. We must assume that parties to conflict will consider how a pause in the fighting will serve their interests. Will there be sufficient benefits, such as humanitarian assistance or vaccines? And in cases where the military has played a central role in the COVID response and where clashes may, as a consequence, have escalated, non-state actors may not believe that the ceasefire will be to their advantage. Most of the COVID-related ceasefires were unilateral. Unilateral ceasefires can make a difference for humanitarian access and they can build confidence, but ultimately, commitments from all parties are required for these ceasefires to serve their purpose, whether this is to promote vaccine distribution or steps towards a settlement. And it is important to learn from the experience with the global ceasefire, especially when seeking to distribute COVID-19 vaccines in conflict areas. We have also devoted considerable attention to the sanctions regimes, focusing on their relevance in relation to the rights and situation of women, in particular as regards conflict-related sexual violence. We were pleased to see stronger language in the most recent resolution on South Sudan, including the mention of the Armed Forces Action Plan against sexual violence. South Africa is a valued partner in Norway's work in the Council. During its most recent tenure as a non-permanent member, South Africa championed and moved the WPS Agenda forward. In line with the South African Security Council resolution, we are seeking full implementation of all resolutions on women, peace and security, and we will keep a keen eye on the security of the briefings. Combating this pandemic calls for the same rationale and approach as that used to build peace and promote sustainable development. We need to address the root causes, and our approach must be long-term, dynamic, fair, and inclusive. This is a time of crisis, but so is every war and every humanitarian catastrophe. Focusing on women's participation and rights must be an integral part of the solution. Inclusion has always required both creativity and solid commitment, and we hope this meeting will lead to both. The Gertrude Shope Annual Dialogue Forum is a key venue for promoting the agenda of women, peace and security. This is in part because this is a forum for practitioners, and I would like to close by thanking South Africa for a long tradition of excellent cooperation in this field. I would also like to thank each and every one of you for your invaluable work in fulfilling the promise of this agenda. Thank you and best of luck with the summit.
Thank you, State Secretary. It is actually indeed you and Norway that we should thank for your commitment to this process. You point out quite rightly that this has to be a long-term commitment. I mean, the commitment to the inclusion of women in peace and security has to be a long-term commitment. Thank you very much for your comments. I hope colleagues will note the importance also of going back to the source on the creation of missions for the UN missions mandates for missions for interventions by the UN, that they must include women in that. Otherwise, it's too late by the time you get to implementation stage. Thank you very much. It is now my singular honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Naledi Pandor, who herself has an impeccable record of being at the forefront of the struggle, not just for women, but for our democracy. What I like about the minister is that although she comes from a family of leaders, she doesn't really refer to that, but rather focuses on what needs to be done, and has spent all of her time post 1994 dedicated to ensuring that our country is set on a secure footing as a post-conflict country. We forget that South Africa is a post-conflict country. It is my pleasure to call on you, Minister, to address us. Over to you, Excellency.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Ambassador Mglagato Diseko, Your Excellency, State Secretary Ardun Halverson, our Honorable Deputy Minister, Ms. Candice Mashiko Dlamini, who's joining us this morning, Her Excellency and my dear sister, Madame Venita Diop, Meg Gertrude Shope, the Acting Director General of the Department, all the panelists who will be joining us in this initial day of the forum, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by being really excited about the illustrious list of women leaders who are going to be part of the forum. Many of you are individuals that I've had the honor to work with closely, women leaders that I admire, commitment, both to intellectual scrutiny, intellectual endeavor, and the advancement and achievement of the agenda of gender equality. I won't name you because I don't wish to leave out anyone, but to each and every one of you, my admiration and my warm greetings. I'd like to welcome everyone to this, the 6th Gertrude Shope Annual Dialogue Forum. I wish to begin, as my colleagues have done, by acknowledging and thanking our partners, particularly the government of the Kingdom of Norway, as well as the people of Norway for their ongoing support to South Africa, and of course the African Union Office of the indefatigable Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security, Madame Diop, a woman I have come to admire and respect. As my colleagues have said, 2021 has been a turbulent year as a result of the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. We as the global community continue to battle with this pandemic, which has dramatically impacted and changed all our lives. It has affected the way we live, the way we conduct business and our work, and the way we interact with each other. I don't know if there's anybody who's missing a handshake or a hug more than I am, but this has caused a deep feeling of loss in all of us. This year, the forum takes place against the backdrop of the celebration by South Africa of the 150 years since the birth of Me Charlotte Manya Maxeke. Our government has accordingly declared 2021 as the year of Charlotte Maxeke in honor of the legacy of this icon of our people. She's often honored as the mother of Black freedom. Charlotte Maxeke was a pioneer of women's education and emancipation. Among many of her achievements, she was a prolific writer who wrote in her mother tongue on the social and political ills of her time and was part of the inception of the liberation movement in South Africa. Charlotte Maxeke continued to address the concept of the women's question. Decades later, just as with the race question, the women's question remains unanswered, but no less pertinent. It is for this reason that the 2021 Women's Month was celebrated in South Africa under the theme, the Year of Charlotte Manya Maxeke, Realizing Women's Equality. The patron of our forum, Gertrude Shope, has spent her own life confronting and responding to this women's question. During her time in the liberation struggle, along with many phenomenal women, she continued with the work begun by pioneers such as Charlotte Maxeke. She fought against the triple oppression of women, an oppression based on race, on gender, on class. The name Gertrude Shope belongs to a rare breed of women whose impact on the political progress of our country is yet to be fully appreciated. I believe we are really fortunate and blessed, we are privileged that she has celebrated her 96th birthday in the past month on the 15th of August. I've mentioned Charlotte Maxeke's ability to write on her times. And as we reflect on what we do in response to practically responding to the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, I want to urge as well that we consider and ensure that we write ourselves about these pioneering women and their continued influence in the ongoing search for responses to the women questions. Our dialogue forum this year is themed Situating the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in Africa's post-COVID-19 recovery phase. The theme is aimed at highlighting the significance of the WPS Agenda in a sustainable post-COVID-19 recovery phase that will, we hope, stimulate equitable and inclusive growth. And Excellency Madame Diop, I would remind you at this point that you and I have a task of ensuring that our commitment to the financial inclusion of women is realized. Commitments were made at our meeting of the Assembly of the African Union in 2020 February. Those commitments, some have been honored, others have not. Several of our heads of state agreed that they would provide funding to initiate the fund that you so eloquently set out with other women leaders at that women's meeting that we attended in the course of the Assembly. I believe realizing the objectives all of you spoke of at that meeting will be part of stimulating this equitable and inclusive growth we all seek. We all know today that what started as a health crisis has turned into a socioeconomic and financial insecurity crisis that is threatening the livelihoods of millions of people, not only in our country, South Africa, not only in Africa, but globally. Number of studies have indicated that the pandemic has resulted in a widening gap in societies and has disproportionately affected women and girls. As an example, as all of you know, in several countries, the lockdown restrictions led to increased cases of gender-based violence and femicide, with some homes becoming enclaves of cruelty, rape, and violence against women and children who are trapped at home with abusive family members. The pandemic has also disproportionately affected women working in the care economy, as well as in the sector of economic activity that we like to refer to as informal, despite its significant contribution to livelihoods and therefore to our country's economies. What has happened is we've had an even bigger increase in job insecurity. Those mothers who eke out a living each day by selling their wares on the street corner have lost a livelihood, and their families are now hungry. In many of our countries, in response to the economic fallout, we devised interventions to support businesses to recover. My sense is our responses were more attuned toward established formal business sectors and really did not provide support to that mama eking out a living on the corner of a street or from her home. We need to find a way of transiting women in these informal sectors into the formal sector. That will assure economic inclusion in Africa and will be a genuine way of creating empowerment of women and greater job security and improved livelihoods. The Generation Equality Forum has reported that in 55 high and middle income countries, 29.4 million women over the age of 25 lost their jobs in the first phase of the pandemic. 29.4 million. It's a staggering statistic. As we continue to grapple with the pandemic and as we seek to build back better, we are required to recommit and to turn our commitments into concrete actions. I suspect that we need creative imagination because it is my sense that relying on the usual institutions to respond may not actually be a sensible approach. Perhaps we should ask every African woman to donate $10 to a fund we shall establish for women's empowerment. And if every woman on the continent would agree, even if it is $1 a month, that she would make eventually that $10 available, and we would award her with a certificate from the African Union that you contributed to empowering a woman, we would have an African fund that would begin to make a difference. I believe such an approach, while unusual and perhaps hazardous and difficult to oversee, Madame Diop, would restore African confidence, would build African consciousness, and would create a new attitude in us to how we respond to our problems. So I challenge you today, and I challenge our program director, that let us try this thing. Let us take responsibility for inclusion, for empowerment, and let us see where such an adventurous and creative step might lead us. In July this year, our President Ramaphosa, addressed the Generation Equality Forum in Paris. He committed South Africa to continue to build a culture of peace in our domestic sphere, and said we should work with other like-minded governments and social partners to build a culture of peace in the continent and globally. This work, he said, will be guided by South Africa's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, as approved by Cabinet in March 2020. The concrete, transformative, and bold actions in that plan include the Youth and Women's Training Program on Conflict Resolution, Mediation, and Negotiation, offered by DIRCO, as well as this Gertrude Shope annual dialogue forum. We know as South Africa that we need such bold action, because just as we were working hard in this year to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, we experienced a most terrible civil unrest in 2 out of the 9 provinces of our country, in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. The mayhem that we saw was further compounded by our existing status of poverty and inequality, but in fact made worse the socioeconomic challenges and left many who are vulnerable, the majority of whom are women, reeling in the aftermath of looting, destruction of property, destruction of infrastructure, and loss of life. And we who are working in this domain of women, peace, and security know that incidents of violence, incidents of criminality in large protest form are always followed by violent attacks on women. In the middle of this crisis, we were really, really excited to see South African women, led by the Gertrude Shope Women Mediators Network, organizing a South African Women Peace Table that mobilized women in their diversity to engage in conflict de-escalation, conflict management, and conflict prevention. They also focused on the creation of unity of purpose and social cohesion, and they discussed ways that would contribute meaningfully to rebuilding South Africa's peace infrastructure. What was most fascinating about the violence that we experienced was the response of the community to say, this must stop. And we will pay attention in our communities to creating peace. And the Gertrude Shope Women Mediators Network made an immense contribution to drawing women in communities together. We are especially pleased with this initiative because it has shown how empowered women can act in supporting the restoration of peace and stability, and in supporting women living in vulnerable conditions. One of the valuable lessons drawn from this experience is that you do not only build peace because there is war, you build peace by investing in local peace infrastructure that can sustain you during times of crises like the one that we experienced in July this year. Since its inception in 2015, the Gertrude Shope Annual Dialogue Forum has always discussed this nexus between peace and development. We know and have asserted consistently that peace and security for women is an integral part of women's growth and development. Leaders and decision makers, as well as policy implementers, know that socioeconomic growth is part of securing peace. So it is important for us to link peace to sustainable socioeconomic development. Dear Excellencies and guests, this dialogue forum must also pay attention to the situation of women in conflict and in post-conflict situations in the continent and elsewhere in the world. We need to develop clear recommendations on how our WPS agenda can support these women in vulnerable situations. We must be mindful of the specific needs and perspectives of women and girls whose education and health rights are first to be compromised in stimulus packages. The current fears of women in Afghanistan call for greater attention to multilateral policies that establish frameworks of safety. We need to look at how we achieve the incorporation of such frameworks in international humanitarian law, because existing law was written before full awareness to the gender agenda. And so this is an aspect we must be giving more attention to. All of us should persist in advocating for the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda with the aim of expanding the avenues for women to continue to contribute to a conflict-free Africa. I've been told, for example, that women in Sudan are beginning to say they were at the forefront of the revolution, of the protest. But now that a transitional council is negotiating a new set of laws and a constitution, women are suddenly peripheral. This should not be allowed to happen. For many years as South Africa, we have played a key role in championing the WPS agenda. This has included even brokering and facilitating dialogues with women at home and abroad. For example, we recall in 2002, South African women facilitated a dialogue between women of the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. This came against the backdrop that the Sun City talks at the time illustrated many of the barriers women face in accessing formal peace negotiations, as well as the unconventional strategies they have to employ to overcome these barriers. At the urging of the United Nations and the chief mediator to the peace talks, the Congolese government and rebel groups agreed to improve women's representation on their delegations, increasing the proportion of women from 2% of delegates in earlier rounds to 12% in the later round of negotiations. This was still not enough. It was 40 out of 340 delegates, but it was a massive change from what had subsisted. The female delegates were informally supported by a women's caucus of Congolese and regional civil society leaders. During the recent riots we had in South Africa, South African women united again to facilitate dialogue among themselves. These women I'm talking about were produced by this forum since its inception in 2015. The forum, therefore, remains an important platform for strengthening our commitment to the WPS agenda. And I look forward to continuing the strong collaboration we have built since this forum was started. I suppose, Program Director, what I'm arguing for is that women should not struggle alone. That the WPS agenda is not a pleasant way of saying women should be included. It is a space for creating collaborative action by women to ensure we achieve the objectives all of us articulate in this forum. We can't leave any group of women alone. And perhaps we need to create a monitoring committee of some kind to observe where there is conflict and to begin conversations with women in societies in conflict, so that when we arrive at the post-conflict position, we are already organized as women in that conflict-ridden society to begin articulating a new agenda. I think if we could pay that kind of attention, including the work we do as the forum on developing women as negotiators, we certainly would achieve a massive step forward. Let me conclude once more by thanking all our partners for their support and their immense contribution to this critical program. I have great faith in this forum. I believe it is doing absolutely incredible work. And I think all we need to do is look at how we build it from strength to strength. I thank all of you for being present here, and I wish you well in your ongoing work. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Minister. This is possible because also you are the host of the Gertrude Shope Annual Dialogue Forum. So we thank you for allowing us the space annually to be able to continue the work that is being done. Your recommendations were very clear, Minister. We need a monitoring mechanism to measure the impact of the work that we have been doing. I would also correlate that with the need for a requirement by the African Union for every peace agreement reached, that it should include women, that the composition of negotiators in conflict situations must also include women, so that the women that come out of this forum can also be deployed to assist women. As you say, women should not be alone. We hear you, Minister, when you say we need clear recommendations at the end of the interactions here, covering a wide range of issues, how to ensure that women are central in the post-pandemic recovery, addressing also issues of stimulus packages that will be put together, that they must have women central. The importance of including the gender agenda into international humanitarian law cannot be stressed, and to do so in a way that ensures that at the point of the negotiation of international humanitarian negotiations, women are present, because international humanitarian assistance should actually assist women who are at the forefront of conflict. No woman should be alone. We hear you, Minister. Before I proceed any further, let me acknowledge our Deputy Minister. I didn't realize that she was here, Honorable Candice Mashego, a woman also who's contributed a lot to our struggle. Dear Deputy Minister, it's a pleasure to have you here. We will now proceed to view a video message, a recorded video message by Gertrude Shope, who was able to set aside time for us to put this together, to be with us. Over to you, colleagues. Can you turn the video on?
Madam, Master of Ceremonies, Ambassador Glenda Diseko, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa, Minister Naledi Pandor, State Secretary of the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Your Excellency, Mr. Madun Halvorsen, Madam Binta Diop, Special Envoy for Women, Peace and Security, all dignitaries and participants present, it is great honor and pleasure for me to once again be given the opportunity to address this important forum. The new threat that the world faces today, the COVID-19 pandemic, is rolling back whatever progress that has been made in the various struggles of women that we have waged. We are affected psychologically, socially, professionally, and from the standpoint of safety and security. It is in that context that I would like to recall the message that I sent out on social media regarding vaccinations after receiving my first jab. In that message, I said that I felt duty-bound to support our government's campaign to combat this new enemy by encouraging as many of us as possible to get vaccinated. I did this fully aware that there are still many debates regarding the vaccines, but also convinced that for now, it is our best option forward. Please encourage your male counterparts, the husbands, partners, friends, brothers, and all of those to you, including other women, to vaccinate. On a final note, I would like to wish you all very fruitful deliberations. We shall all be eagerly awaiting the recommendations that will emanate from the 2021 forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gertrude. Raleboga for taking time. Raleboga for taking time to be with us. I don't know if we can all turn our videos on and just clap for Gertrude and finish with Wathinta Bafazi, Wathinta Mbogoto. Wathinta Mbogoto. This brings us to the end of this session, Minister, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank the colleagues who put it all together. Ms. Lobe and team, Ms. Titi Ngumalo and Nicole and all of you who've made sure that you put this together. The commentary in the chat box is also encouraging. One says, Minister, we take up your challenge of raising funds. And actually, if I'm correct, the population of women in the continent is about 700 million. Just with one rand, we can make 700 million, sorry, with $1. Or with 50 cents, we get 350. That for me would also be a mobilization thing to galvanize a woman to take charge of their inclusion. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Madam Diop. Thanks to the State Secretary. And thank you all for being here with us. I would like to close the session and ask Dr. Morake to take over. And the Minister and the guests can exit. Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much.
All right.
And I will depart, colleagues. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Many thanks, Ambassador. Madam Minister, as you're leaving, Dr. Naledi Pandor, Your Excellency Auden Halverson, Special Envoy Binta Diop, Ambassador Mkakatu Diseko, our DDG for the Branch Global Governance and Continental Agenda, Mama Mashope, and all protocol observed. A very good and warm morning and welcome to the second session of the 2021 Gertrude Shope Annual Dialogue Forum. As Ambassador has already introduced me, I'm Rachel Morake, the Director responsible for the National Office for the Coordination of Peace Missions at the DIRCO, and I will be coordinating this session. This session will focus on the global health debate and the impact of COVID-19 on women in Africa. It'll also look at issues around vaccines. It'll look at stigmas around it and vaccine diplomacy and their impact on especially women in Africa. We, of course, ladies and gentlemen, remain mindful that the global health debate is much broader than only that of the COVID-19 virus. And I'm sure our panelists will touch on these various important issues. But the pandemic continues to have an unprecedented effect on all communities around the world, particularly its direct and indirect impact on the livelihoods of especially women and children has been especially devastating. As our scientists are identifying more variants, ladies and gentlemen, of this virus, all the more regularly, vaccination programs remain increasingly critical to protect those in our communities who are at high risk of hospitalization and death, as well as to reduce the strain on health systems and help slow the transmission. Issues around vaccination have arisen and therefore especially pertinent to women who continue to disproportionately bear the brunt in our communities. These issues, such as unequal access to vaccines between countries around the world, as well as the spread of misinformation about vaccines, are all important and they need to come to mind as we deliberate this morning. It is for these reasons that we have convened this illustrious panel to guide and advise us further on these issues. I'm very excited about our lineup of speakers today, and I have just seen that Deputy Minister has appeared briefly on my screen, and just want to check quickly if I may proceed, Madam Deputy Minister, for you to begin our program. Can I get a yes so I can introduce you, ma'am?
Yes, Madam, yes.
Thank you very, very much. So to start off, we are honored this morning to have our Deputy Minister, Her Excellency Ms. Candice Mashiro Dlamini, who is our Deputy Minister for International Relations and Cooperation. Ms. Mashego Dlamini played an instrumental role in setting up a detainees parent support committee in the 1980s to thwart the impact of the arrests of many anti-apartheid activists. She participated in many structures, including the National Education Union of South Africa, which spearheaded the formation of the South African Democratic Teachers Union, what we know as SADTU. Ms. Mashego Dlamini has been a Member of Parliament since 2014 and has subsequently served in many high-level government positions, including as the MEC for Health, Welfare and Gender Affairs, MEC for Agriculture, Conservation and Environment, MEC for Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Administration, MEC for Health and Social Development, and previously as Deputy Minister of Rural Development and Land Reform. Ms. Mashego Dlamini has degrees in the arts and education and is currently studying towards a master's degree in public management. I now wish to give the floor to Her Excellency, Madam Mashego Dlamini. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Program Director. My greetings to Professor Shisana, Dr. Smelela, Ms. Okpana, Ms. Mpewa, Program Director, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by welcoming you to the 2021 Gertrude Shope Annual Dialogue Forum. I am honored to share this panel with all of you, as well as grateful to everyone participating and watching from afar. Indeed, our dialogue this year is again taking place under circumstances that seem to have become the new normal. Hence, we are meeting through this visual portal platform. This new normal form of visual communication, however, allows us to reach an audience we will not usually have access to. And as such, I hope that the 2021 Gertrude Shope Annual Dialogue Forum is similarly reaching a wider audience. This session focuses on the global health debate and the impact of COVID-19 on women in Africa. The pandemic has had a precedented effect all over the world, including the severe disruption to society and economies, to global travel and commerce, as well as the devastating impact on the livelihood of people, more especially women and children. The tragedy of our time is that once again, it is the poorest and most vulnerable that have been the hardest hit by the pandemic. Women in particular have been disproportionately affected. Crises have a negative effect on special women. Civil conflicts, political conflicts, natural disasters, and health emergencies all result in disruption of communities, and women disproportionately bear the brunt of at multi-levels. Indeed, in Africa and all over the world, women and children continue to be disproportionately affected by violence, conflict, both in terms of social violence, civil war, terrorism, and financial insecurity. Part of the intention of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is to devise ways for women to lead in securing peace and security. Distinguished guests, Africa is the second most populous continent in the world, with more than 1.3 billion people, yet the continent is last in line to have access to vaccines, while the richest countries are well advanced in vaccinating their people, while at the same time having vast reserve of doses of vaccines. Vaccination remains our most effective weapon in the fight against COVID-19. As part of the Global South, it is especially important for South Africa to ensure that the necessary related medicines and vaccines are equally and fairly available to all countries, rich and poor. Future global emergencies should find us better prepared with stronger social protection, health system, and services for our people. To better achieve this, it is imperative that every country should respond to this pandemic by working closely together on the research and innovation to produce solutions to the pandemic and other health and development-related challenges. We remain concerned about the rapid spread of COVID-19, which continues to pose a major challenge to humanity and requires a global response based on unity, solidarity, and renewed multilateral cooperation. Indeed, it cannot be stressed enough that the international community needs to work in unity and in solidarity through a collective policy to overcome global challenges and mitigate its multifaceted impacts in the spirit of collaboration and not confrontation. Program Director, we must call for the end to vaccine nationalism and for equal access to vaccines by all countries. We must fight vaccines inequality. We must also ensure equal access to diagnostic, therapeutic, and other medical equipment to fight the pandemic. It is for this that South Africa, along with India, campaigned at the World Trade Organization for a temporary waiver of certain provision of the agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights to allow more countries, particularly developing countries, to produce COVID-19 vaccines in order to efficiently respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, President Cyril Ramaphosa is recognized as the COVID-19 champion of the African Union in his urgent call to end vaccine nationalism and indeed vaccine apartheid through calling for this urgent waiver of the WTO TRIPS agreement to ensure the rapid upscaling of the production of COVID-19 vaccines, medicines, and sharing of technology needed to end the pandemic and save lives. South Africa, through a partnership with BioVac, has recently also secured an agreement to manufacture the Pfizer vaccine. This will provide a semblance of vaccine security not only for South Africa, but the continent at large. South Africa was furthermore chosen to host the WHO's first COVID-19 messengers vaccine technology hub to scale up production and access to vaccines. We moreover welcome the effort of countries which have donated COVID-19 vaccines and actively encourage further sharing of vaccines doses from all countries in a positive to do so without politicization to allow and middle-income countries and other countries in need, particularly through COVAX, including on the basis of the WHO allocation framework for fair access and equitable allocation of COVID-19 vaccines health products. Indeed, we welcome the delivery of the 5.6 million Pfizer vaccines received earlier last month as donated by the United States of America. The donation will ensure an adequate supply of vaccines to intensify our vaccination rollout program. Ladies and gentlemen, we, however, remain deeply concerned about the ongoing challenges of uneven access to quality, safe, efficient, and affordable COVID-19 vaccines and the difficulties that the majority of countries face in accessing and supplying these to their population. In the face of this type of global emergency, the spirit of solidarity must be at the center of our efforts, and a high level of ethical and humanist commitment is required, where solidarity and selfless cooperation prevail in order to provide the peoples in need with medicine, medical equipment and supplies, food, exchange of expertise and good practices. It is important that we maintain the continued functioning of the health system and strengthen primary health care in all levels, in all relevant aspects necessary for an effective public health response to the COVID-19 pandemic and other ongoing epidemics. This includes ensuring the continuation of undisrupted vaccination program with a view to achieving universal health coverage. As Minister Pandor remarked at the annual observance of the Nelson Mandela International Day on the 21st July 2021, former President Mandela will have stressed the importance of all nations rising and working together, sharing ideas, the means and all the tools required for ending this vicious pandemic, which knows no boundaries. Central to this is equitable, secure, predictable, and affordable access in real time to vaccines and all the tools which nations require to respond to the pandemic. This forum, together with the accompanying Gertrude Shope publication that captures information and knowledge, has become a powerful vehicle to promote South Africa's continued role and contribution to the Women, Peace and Security agenda. All of us should persist in advocating for the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda with the aim of expanding the avenues for women to continue to contribute to a conflict-free Africa. Once more, my thanks to all our partners and participants for your immense contribution to this critical program. I thank you, Program Director.
Many thanks, Madam Deputy Minister, for the presentation. It's very apt. We acknowledge, ma'am, your call for the end of vaccine apartheid and more equal access to quality, safe, efficacious vaccines in order to respond adequately to and effectively to this relentless pandemic. We have also noted your call with regards to medical supplies. This you have reiterated together with Minister that equitable, secure, affordable access is the way forward, especially if we have to contribute to ameliorating the plight of women and children in conflict situations. Many thanks, Madam Deputy Minister. I would now like to suggest that we take a 7 minutes break or so, a body break, because our session was supposed to begin at 10:30, but we were a bit early, which is always good to be a bit early. But I wanted to suggest that we take a 7-minute break and we resume at 10:30 sharp. Thank you very much. Could we please just leave our gadgets logged on and just take the body break so that we're then back on time? We will begin at 10:30 sharp. Thank you very much. I would like us to begin, colleagues. Welcome back to the second session. I hope that our next speaker is ready to come through. As we begin after this short break, ladies and gentlemen, next up we have Dr. Nothemba Simelela, who is the Special Advisor to the Director General on Strategic Programmatic Initiatives at World Health Organization. Dr. Simelela has previously been Assistant Director General for Family, Women, Children and Adolescents. She has more than 30 years of experience as an obstetrician, academic, advocate, and government official. Previously, she also served as Special Advisor to the Vice President of the Republic of South Africa on social policy, which included supporting the multi-sectoral government-wide response for HIV. Previously, senior leadership roles include serving as Chief Executive Officer of the South African National AIDS Council and Director of Technical Knowledge and Support for the International Planned Parenthood Federation. Dr. Simelela has presented and published widely on women's health and contributed to the development of key guidelines, such as the prevention of mother-to-child transmission on HIV. Over the years, she held memberships and continues to do so on a variety of professional bodies, boards, and committees at local, regional, and international levels. She remains passionate about women's health and access to quality health social services for all. I now wish to give the floor to Dr. Simelela. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Program Director. May I just offer my greetings to all excellencies, ambassadors, all the high-level participants, all protocols observed. I want to just say warm greetings to colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and to just acknowledge and say it's an honor for me to be participating in this very, very unique forum that honors one of our stalwarts who fortunately is still with us today. The inputs that I'd like to make under this heading of the global health debate and the impact of COVID-19 on women, I'll just divide them into 4 areas. I'll touch very briefly on the developments at the global level, because that is where WHO is intrinsically engaged because of the nature of this pandemic. And then I will move into the impact of COVID-19 on women and women's health, as well as some recommendations that we might consider as governments and countries to improve as we build better. We know that at this point in time, a lot of evaluations have been done on how this pandemic happened, why such an event that was in one country became a global catastrophe. And some of the findings that have come out of reports of a wide range of independent panels that have been established by various bodies, including WHO itself, do highlight the fact that the preparations for this pandemic were inconsistent and underfunded, that the world has always known that a pandemic was imminent. As to when is what was not known, but the if was not an issue. But despite that warning, countries, whether they were well-resourced or not, were not prepared. The alert system was weak and slow. Global political leadership was absent, and where it was present, it was contradictory, leading to delays in the containment measures. The World Health Organization itself was found wanting in some of its systems and processes. So at the moment, the global debate is around how we can make this the last pandemic. Work is undergoing now on looking at the governance of pandemic preparedness, the financing of such a pandemic, as well as what countries and states need to, the issues around the impact of the pandemic on women's health. I want to take a step back to just demonstrate that this pandemic is actually a double tragedy for women. And I say this because a report commissioned by the Africa Office of the World Health Organization 10 years ago already focused on the status of women's health in Africa. That report was sobering in that it showed that the status of women's health in Africa is deplorable, talking about a woman dying in birth every minute. And we know pregnancy is not supposed to be a disease, but even today, we still have high rates of maternal mortality in Africa. That report also highlighted that women, despite their critical role in society, their contribution to development and health, as well as welfare of the families and the communities, which also translates into economic gains for those countries, is really not well articulated. It is not well understood, resulting in underinvestment in women's health issues, health systems that are responsive to women, and then leading to these large numbers in maternal mortality, as well as higher rates of infections, higher rates of non-communicable diseases now, as well as ongoing intergenerational issues that are a result of the lack of appreciation of the social determinants of health and contracted and chronic poverty. So when you have a pandemic like this, women enter it already with a deficit. So we are facing now a double tragedy in that the impact of COVID on women has been almost manifold. First, in their role as healthcare providers, 70% of the healthcare workforce comprises women, or women comprise 70% of the healthcare workforce, which means they bore the brunt of looking after all of the people who became ill due to COVID. That in itself put them at higher risk of infection. And we have seen even with our own health workers in South Africa that was the case. But as beneficiaries of the health system itself, women also suffered because as we focused on dealing with the pandemic, essential health services were put on the side. We now see in South Africa, we've already seen an evaluation, a survey that shows that maternal mortality has gone up. Neonatal mortality is starting to go up. Coverage in terms of immunization for infants and children has gone down. And that we know now that with the lockdowns, we've seen higher rates of unintended pregnancies amongst young women and girls, some up to the age of 10 years. And we have seen higher rates of dropouts in schools and higher rates of gender-based violence. At the home front, women continue to be triply affected. I say that because, firstly, they are the frontline providers in the households. Women who work had to take on unpaid childcare, and I call it unpaid because they would have had to continue to work whilst they tried to look after children who were at home because they couldn't go to school. That resulted in some of these high levels of gender-based violence because, generally women and their partners who have a job would have been out working and not in the same space all the time. So that must have resulted in conflict and all of the things that we are now seeing. Now, the knock-on effects on that means that women now have to cope with higher rates of mental problems, we have a report that now shows that even children as young as 5, 6 are demonstrating mental and health impacts that then their mothers, who are women, will have to deal with. So we're seeing cumulative assault on the ability of women to even recover in the short term from the impact of COVID, and in the long term, having to deal with all of the issues that are going to be the after effects of COVID. In terms of women at work, for instance, we know that women are employed in sectors that pay them low wages. 70% of the informal work economy comprises of women. Therefore, these are women who probably have fallen into poverty because they've lost their jobs, because the circumstances under which they are able to make a living have been changed by the lockdown measures or any other changes that governments have had to effect as the attempts to control and manage this pandemic. So what does this mean for countries and for maybe South Africa in particular when we talk about the post-COVID arrangements, planning, building back better, and all the things that are currently preoccupying the minds of policymakers and leaders in our community? First and foremost, I think the approaches and the responses by government in terms of fiscal stimulus, social relief measures, and all of the things that our government in particular has put in place to help buttress the women and their families have also had limitations. Our minister highlighted, Minister Pando, that many of the fiscal measures were aimed at formal businesses, but women who are in the informal sector, who also do not have access to some of the relief packages, as in paid leave and things like that, have not been considered. So one of the strongest recommendations is that we need to relook some of these relief measures with a deliberate gender lens to make sure that women at the bottom of the economic ladder benefit and do not have to carry the impact of COVID into the next generation, as the case may be. The second thing that I'd really like to focus on, because of the focus I have on women's health and health in general, is that we really need to relook how and what we mean by building back better for the health system. We need a health system that is going to be agile and resilient. Resilient to pick up any new zoonotic diseases, which means we must work much closer with the environmental colleagues, with other partners that are critical, animal health and others, because the One Health approach is very important. We need to focus on that, but at the same time, try and find ways to make surveillance part and parcel of community life. We saw with the Ebola response that by building capacity at the community level to identify where problems were, the ability of humanitarian organizations to respond and to treat and to contain these viruses was much improved. We need to make better attempts at involving civil society from the outset, because I think in our response, it was urgent, and with the lockdown, there was no opportunity to get the inputs that are critical from civil society, from women themselves, on what needs to be done to assist in the recovery phase. We need to look much more at how we finance our health system. We have a plan for the NHI, but that plan must make sure that there is no out-of-pocket expenditure, especially for women who do not have the resources to access healthcare normally, and when they need care at tertiary level, it's also quite expensive. A specific focus also is required on looking at our ability really to build a more robust and sustainable workforce for the health sector. The biggest challenge we face now is that we do not have sufficient nurses in the system, sufficient specialists in the system, and this must be a priority for our country going forward. And then the last and most important thing is how we use technology, innovation, the entrepreneurial skills that young people have to really help us with new point of care diagnostics, new ways of using social media to assist women in particular to be able to manage their own health, self-sampling kits at home so they don't have to come into the system for care, and all of these new things that are coming up in our innovation, the science and technology that can be put at the hands of ordinary people so that we do not overwhelm the health system. There is hope. I think there is hope for South Africa and hope for the continent, because the quality of scientific rigor in this country has put us at the forefront. Mention has been made of all the new developments in vaccines, in technology, but most importantly, in the fact that we were able to protect our frontline workers through the science and the research that was part and parcel of the global attempts to find solutions for this epidemic. The path going forward is going to be long and protracted, but if we continue to make those investments in our own people, in the organic nature of how innovation starts, how young people can contribute, how communities can design their own responses, we have a chance to really build back better, be more inclusive, have a better communication, and really make sure that the inequities that continue to persist in this country are closed and narrowed so that we do not have the divide between the haves and the have-nots. I think we have incredible partnerships with people and comrades across the continent, and the collaboration we have seen with our scientists across the globe makes us ready and puts us in a better position as South Africa to move forward. With these words, I want to also just highlight that the scourge of gender-based violence is something that as South Africans, we really need to find different solutions for. It must remain a priority, and every single one of us present here as a panelist or listening has a role to play to make sure that we really see an end to this tragic loss of life that is a very bad smear on our country that is really moving forward in many other ways. I hope we remain optimistic, we remain committed, and that we remain resilient as we always have been as South Africans, and that we share what we have with our comrades on the continent. I thank you very much.
Many thanks indeed, Dr. Simelela, for your succinct intervention on the impact of COVID-19 on women and their health as we build back better. I think critical to your presentation is finding strategies to thwart the pandemic and ensure that this is the last pandemic. And safe to say, for me, that that pandemic would be the one that will not devastate our livelihoods any longer. You have also given us a wake-up call by reminding us of the double tragedy and the manifold dilemmas and conundrums that impact women, especially maternal mortality, dropout rates in schools, gender-based violence, and other socioeconomic factors negatively or cumulatively, as you said, affecting women since the onset of the pandemic. Many thanks indeed. And we take these issues to heart and will work on deliberate gender-lensed strategies going forward. This way we will build better using the One Health approach by investing in our own. Many, many thanks indeed. I would just like to invite colleagues that please, you are welcome to make comments or to send questions on the chat platform so that I can then give those to our panelists to respond back to. I will keep checking the chat platform as we go along. Let me then take this opportunity to welcome our next speaker, who is Professor Glenda Gray, who is the President of and CEO of the South African Medical Research Council. She was previously the chair of the Research Committee on COVID-19, bringing together scientific evidence and experience to the Minister of Health and the National Coronavirus Command Council. Professor Gray studied medicine and pediatrics at Wits University, where she remains a full professor in research in the School of Clinical Medicine, a National Research Foundation A1 rated scientist. Professor Gray is a world-renowned researcher in HIV vaccines and interventions to prevent mother-to-child transmission of HIV. She co-founded and led the globally eminent perinatal HIV research unit at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital in Soweto. For this work, she co-received the Nelson Mandela Health and Human Rights Award in 2002. Among many others, Professor Gray's accolades include the Hero of Medicine Award from the International Association of Physicians in AIDS Care, and the Outstanding Africa Scientist Award from the European and Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership. Forbes named Professor Gray one of Africa's 50 most powerful women, and Time magazine named her as one of the world's 100 most influential people. Lastly, in 2013, she was awarded South Africa's highest honor, the Order of Mapungubwe. Ladies and gentlemen, I now wish to give the floor to Professor Gray. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thanks very much. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Prof.
Excellent. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this program and to discuss some of the impacts of COVID. As a doctor following another doctor, we all focus a lot on the same things. And what I have will look at is mostly the impact of COVID in South Africa and some of the challenges that face women in South Africa. So just to, sorry, I'm having problems with my, just to say that, as we know with COVID, there's always a delicate balance between preventing loss of livelihoods and preventing loss of lives. And in South Africa, we've seen this dynamic being played out. And whether it's preventing loss of livelihoods or preventing loss of lives, women are disproportionately impacted by this balancing act. In many ways, both from a health point of view and a livelihood point of view. And this will be the dynamic that will play out, and we will have to develop ways of protecting women in this battle to control COVID-19 in our country. Suffice to say that even though there are reports of deaths with COVID, we at the MRC have been following since 30 years excess deaths in our country. And because of our surveillance on excess death, we were also able to identify the new epidemic of HIV, showing that HIV was causing more deaths in women, or in young women of reproductive age. And we've been able to plot the excess deaths that have happened during since the onset of the COVID pandemic. And this will just show you that our excess deaths in South Africa follow the epidemic curve in our country. And we have more than three times the amount of excess deaths than are reported, which means that people are dying from COVID, from undiagnosed COVID, from other diseases like HIV and TB, and this reflects the lack of resilience of our health system. We predict that in 2021 in South Africa, that COVID will become the leading cause of death in our country and will pass HIV. Up until now, HIV has been the leading cause of death in our country, and unfortunately, COVID will become the leading cause of death in South Africa in 2021. Just to show you how COVID has affected the resilience of our health system, this just shows you TB and HIV testing during different levels of lockdown, and showing the reduction in the amount of TB diagnosis we've made, as well as in the viral load and CD4 monitoring. And obviously we know that HIV disproportionately affects women in our country, which means that a lot of women are not accessing their medication and their care, and our lack of ability to continue to diagnose TB because of the health system being reorientated towards COVID-19 will lead to a future TB burden already in a country that has high burden of TB. Just to look at some specific stuff, Dr. Sumalela did mention the issue around women and their inability to access health during a pandemic. And this just shows you an example of a pregnant woman and who are HIV infected, and seeing the hesitancy. And this will have a problem because if women who are HIV infected aren't being diagnosed and are not put on treatment, will have a concomitant increase in the amount of children getting HIV. Up until 2019, South Africa was doing a really good job in controlling pediatric HIV, and with the inability of us to identify and treat pregnant women who are HIV infected, this will have a problem in the future, and our ability to control pediatric HIV. Women are afraid of going to the hospital to get antenatal care. And in some cases, ARVs are not available, and in some cases, there are transport problems. And we have to recreate a trust in the health system, and to make sure that people aren't scared to access health because of getting coronavirus in the future. Very important what we saw in South Africa, and this reflects the global and particularly African view, is that a lot of jobs were lost. And a lot of the jobs that were lost were attributed to women, so so women again experienced the loss of livelihood during a pandemic, and are the ones who bear the burden of job losses in our sector. And obviously the people that are newly unemployed also come from very vulnerable households with no social income grants, and so I think this is an important thing to address. Just looking at other things that will affect women's mental health and affect their situation at home is the running out of food. So the poverty indicators have increased. So people running out of food, going hungry in the household, and children going hungry in the household will affect women's mental health and their ability to navigate, particularly in female-headed households. Just also, as has been mentioned before, is that the issue of mental health and the increase in depressive symptoms and mental health issues that we're seeing during a pandemic. We're seeing a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of families have been directly or indirectly affected by COVID and have also had to mitigate COVID deaths. We've seen a lot of families that have been affected the way we can care for our loved ones as women, the way we are able to bury our loved ones, and the way we're able to mourn our loved ones have been severely affected by COVID-19, and this will have huge mental health ramifications in years to come. Also, which is also mostly a female issue, is the amount of school days that are lost due to the COVID pandemic and the various lockdown levels. And this, as we've heard before, will affect female-headed households and even households with men. Women do bear the brunt of education. But when school days are lost and when children drop out of school, this impacts on the ability of girl children to get out of poverty, and girl children to protect themselves from pregnancy. As we know, teenage pregnancy is a strong predictor of adult poverty going forward. Just in terms of impact on the household, and this has been touched on further, but I will emphasize, is that women have been affected badly by COVID-19. They've experienced greater job losses. Childcare does affect women's labor market outcomes more than men. Women will bear the brunt of additional childcare responsibilities, and this is across the sectors. Whether you're a worker, whether you're middle class, or whether you're a scientist, we have seen that women will take on the additional burden in a household, even where there is a male who is in the same kind of job as you. You find that women have to spend more time managing childcare, learning, and addressing academic responsibilities. And we also see at this stage a widening of the wage gap between men and women, which also impacts particularly female-headed households. Looking at how COVID has affected our SDGs, as mentioned, at a global level, people have been pushed into extreme poverty. School closures has affected schools at a global level. The increased cases of domestic violence we've seen at a global level needs to be addressed. This is obviously mitigated by issues around alcohol use and job losses and people living in overcrowded and poor with poor infrastructure. And we also have seen at a global level also the issues around peace, justice, and institutions that address legal and justice issues, and that the issues of prison overcrowding can also lead to the spread of COVID. We have to address all the SDGs and how this has impacted it. But mostly of all, for me, which is of great concern, is the issues around work and health that have been severely affected by the COVID pandemic. And so what do we have to do going forward? And this has been mentioned before by Dr. Simelela, is to make sure that as women and women healthcare workers, that we push to restore childhood immunization. We have seen both in South Africa and at a global level is that children have not got vaccinated due to COVID, and this will affect our infant mortality rate and our under 5 mortality rate. We also have to make sure as women healthcare workers that we ensure that our antenatal and delivery services are protected. We've seen an increase in maternal mortality due to the health system disruption because of COVID-19. Important for women in our country, we have to restore HIV viral load monitoring and access to treatment, as well as TB diagnosis. We have to secure chronic medicine supply, the supply chain and delivery, and accelerate innovative private sector solutions that will help us deliver impact quickly and be cost effective. In terms of COVID-19 and women leadership, I want to say that, as usual, women always step up to the plate, and we have seen, particularly in South Africa and at a global level, how women in science have quickly switched gears and applied all the information that they've learned and all the everything they've learned in their prior interface with pathogens to COVID-19. And we've seen some of the most beautiful signs coming out, particularly around variants of concern, understanding the immunology and the virology of COVID-19 has come from women-led laboratories and women scientists. In terms of health, we know that women are the majority healthcare workers in our country, and so they've had to deal with the onslaught of the pandemic at every wave, and they have been the people that have faced the surges in the hospitals, and they've had to deal with inadequate PPE and having to deliver healthcare before vaccinations could be rolled out. So we want to make sure that we salute all the women in healthcare and the work that they've done to keep the health system going and to manage COVID in their wards and in their ICUs. And also women in education. The majority of teachers are women, and they've had to navigate a new kind of life in terms of trying to deliver high levels, high quality education in a system that's disrupted, and also having to deal with how to interface and deal with this new situation, which needs incredible leadership. And I want to salute our minister, who has done amazing work in the education department and has led in a decisive way, keeping schools open and being incredibly brave in trying to make sure that the academic year is maintained and that teachers get vaccinated as a priority. So great leadership in terms of education. And also just to finally end off with vaccines, because they obviously are very important. And also to say that it was a woman-led team in South Africa that got vaccines into the country when the national rollout faltered because of the new variant of concern. And leading this team, this group of women were able to deliver almost 500,000 COVID-19 vaccines to healthcare workers, and able to extend not only to deliver the service in urban settings, but also in rural settings using mobile units and opening up sites in rural hospitals that were far away from the urban settings in rural areas. And so this is just a shout out to the women in South Africa that have been involved in COVID vaccine trials and have been involved in rolling out a magnificent program that gave healthcare workers vaccines at a time when there was nothing, and this vaccine protected healthcare workers during the Delta surge. And these female healthcare workers who ran Sisonke are able to demonstrate the effectiveness at a global level. The data that has been accrued from the study is able to deliver information on the Delta variant and demonstrate the effectiveness of the A26 vaccine in a Delta surge, as well as provide very important information on the effectiveness of this vaccine in HIV-infected individuals. And so just to salute women in health, women in science, and women in education, because they are usually the people that take up the challenges and deliver what the country needs. So I'm going to end there and stop sharing my screen. Let me just see, am I still sharing it or not? Okay, I think I'm done.
No,
thanks. Thank you very much.
Now.
Thanks.
Many thanks, Prof. Thanks very much for raising the concerns, especially those pointing to the fact that COVID would tend to be the leading cause of death, and that as a result, it has surpassed other globally known causes of death, especially as they relate to women's lives. Like Dr. Smilani, Prof, you have also alluded to the socioeconomic challenges women face. You mentioned mental health challenges directly or indirectly mitigated by the COVID pandemic, and how these impact women more. As a recovering long COVID patient, I have a lived experience of the impact of the loss of loved ones, like many other South Africans and people around the world. So I can relate to your intervention, Prof. We've also noted your call to push and restore child immunization and antenatal programs, and just how important it is for us to ensure that we continue to advocate for, all positive programs that will help ameliorate the plight of women with respect to their health, their socioeconomic lives, and also to their general livelihoods. As a parting shot, ladies and gentlemen, for me, it's gratifying to see that no effort is spared to trailblaze the Women in Development and Women, Peace and Security agenda, and that the DIRCO has worked tirelessly to ensure that that since its inception over the years, the Gertrude Shope Forum receives a facelift every time it goes in front of a mirror for a makeup. And as Minister concluded when she gave us her speech, we look forward to the forum growing from strength to strength. We now have come to the end of the second session, but I would like to open just for a few minutes because Prof needs to leave at a certain time, and also for Dr. Simelela. I would like to open, and I'm not sure if Deputy Minister is still available to take questions, but I'm going to open for Q&A if there are any questions or comments from our participants. I must say I haven't noted any comments or any questions on the chat platform so far, except that yes, there's a few coming in. The one say that this is very important session given the fact of what we are experiencing as women. My question will be, is there any program that seeks to assist rural communities, especially women? We have that question. And the next one says, thanks, Prof. Gray, for a very good presentation highlighting the importance of immunization and the role of women in the fight against this pandemic. The other one says, does the WHO have such a global monitoring mechanism in terms of stocks of vaccines per country? And we'll be getting some more that will be coming down in the chat. We have those three for our panelists, and I will then open the floor in that order of the questions, please. Thank you.
So I'll let Nono answer the questions about the WHO, but I'll just answer the questions about, we're not doing enough. Clearly, we're not doing enough in the rural provinces, in the rural areas of our country in terms of access to vaccines. I hear on a daily basis, people who are pensioners in rural areas who are desperately trying to get a vaccine. They queue, and when they get to the top of the queue, the vaccine has run out. And so we need to work harder in getting. We need to work harder in getting vaccines to rural areas, and we need to be innovative in that. So we have to pay attention to the rural woman, and also the rural elderly women, because they also bear the brunt of supporting households. So we need to do a much better job at that, and we need to, hopefully we can address this through the vaccination program. And I know the national rollout, they're committed to getting to rural areas in the country. And in terms of the immunization issues, we have to be relentless in insisting that vaccination programs are restored in our country, and as well as the antenatal care and the support of pregnant women, particularly in labor. We have to be relentless in making sure that there's quality care given to women in the healthcare setting. In terms of just vaccination, is that I think that we see a very divided world, where billions of vaccines are given at a global level, and some rich countries are now getting their third vaccine. We're seeing in parts of particularly in Africa, just a lack of access even to a single dose vaccine, let alone a boost. And this global inequality, we have to address, and make sure that this doesn't happen again, where we left out in the cold. And I think we have to become independent. We have to make sure we can do our own vaccine manufacturing, and we have to make sure that we don't rely on anyone else but ourselves to make sure that we have our vaccines. And I think this is what happened, is that there was a lot of thinking that possibly, we wouldn't have to do our own bilateral negotiations with pharma, and that's what led us to, not having access at an appropriate time. And I think we also have to look at the global entities like COVAX. How has COVAX served us, and how hasn't it served it, and what were the barriers for access, and how do we make sure global mechanisms for vaccine access don't fail the poor in Africa again.
Many thanks indeed, Prof. I will then give the opportunity to Dr. Simelela.
Okay. No, thank you very much. Yes, WHO does have a database, vaccine tracker. We are able to see particularly the vaccines that are being distributed through the COVAX facility. We know which countries are receiving and the number of doses. Also through the Africa CDC and our office in the WHO Afro region, were able to track those doses. What was a bit tragic also, which has led to this vaccine nationalism, is that right at the beginning, rich countries were able to secure contracts through what we call advanced market commitments and bilateral deals, which were not transparent. So that kind of information is not readily available to WHO, but with further inquiry and more requests by the Director General, we do know that some countries have, 9 doses of vaccine per person, like they've got so many more doses than what they need, which is why there was a call issued by the Director General to ask rich countries to start sharing their vaccines, to donate their vaccines, which is what's happening right now. But yes, we are able to track, and many other institutions also are tracking these vaccines. There is a website where you can go to look at what is happening around vaccine development, as well as approval, as well as distribution across the world. But it is unethical, I think, to be having a situation where over 5.3 million doses have been administered globally, and only 1.7% of the population in Africa has had a dose of the vaccine. Thank you.
Many thanks, many thanks, Dr. Simelela. There's more questions coming. S asks, how do you correlate the challenges of unemployment and food security with the vaccination program? And she says these are questions that come back on a daily basis. The next one is on from Fatima. Women have also been leading initiatives for treatments, for example, ivermectin, that are cheaper and effective against COVID. We also need to educate them on improving their natural immunity, food, health, vitamins, etc. I think this is more a comment than a question. And another one says we should be looking at taking vaccines to ones that cannot afford to go to the sites to get vaccinated, whether through health or finances. Corey says, I appreciate the attention given to addressing vaccine global inequalities. Thank you, Dr. Gray. Those are the last that I'm receiving as we go along. So I think we only have one question that has come through, the one on correlating the challenges of unemployment and food security or insecurity with vaccination programs.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a stab, then maybe ask Nono to continue. I think it's the balance between lives and livelihoods, and a vaccine program will enable women, particularly if there are vaccine mandates, to get back into the labor market and continue their looking for jobs and accessing jobs and getting back into the economy. So the benefits of vaccines is that it prevents death and hospitalization and helps us to open up our economy. But at the same time, obviously, we need to make sure that there's social. We have a social compact in place that addresses the issues of poverty, hunger, and lack of opportunities. And hopefully, when we look at a post-COVID economic recovery, we address the needs of women so that they can participate in an economy post-COVID that is useful for them going forward. So the correlation, I guess, is that without a vaccine, we can't get our lives back, and it's the first step to getting back to normality in our country and at a global level.
Thank you, Prof. Dr. Smelela, do you want to take a bite?
Yes, just very briefly. I think, like as Professor Glenda says, it's correlation between nutrition status, I suppose, and inability to access support at a biological level. I think that is not the question. But right now, I think what's happening is you've got several interventions by the state. The social relief of distress grant that's been given, some of the food parcels that have managed to reach people, others not. Those were measures, I think, to address the loss of livelihoods. And then, you now have the vaccination program that is meant to reach everybody now that, all the age cohorts are open. And the attempt of the vaccination program is to deal with opportunity costs by taking the vaccination to the people so people don't spend money coming into the sites. That's what's been discussed and being implemented. That's why you see transport being provided and things like that. But we, as Glenda says, if we succeed to vaccinate as many people as possible, then we are in a better position to deal with the fourth wave. And therefore, we would not, hopefully, God willing, not need to be having lockdowns on and off. That is the agenda right now, that we really must get to everybody with the vaccination so that we at least are protected from severe disease, hospitalization, and death should a fourth wave come. And if it is not that damaging, then we don't then need the lockdowns, and then women and other people should be able to continue with putting their lives together and continuing to improve their livelihoods through whatever informal work that they are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much to both Prof. Gray, our Deputy Minister, Mashego Dlamini, Professor Simelela, for this very, very insightful session and for giving us your time. We have now come to the end of the session and we will resume at 1 o'clock. Thank you for participation to all the other women and men who are joining today. And bon appetit, and we see you at 1 o'clock. Many thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.